Hello and welcome to a lesson on percentages. This hopefully will be a review for you, and I think we've done a little bit of this kind of sprinkled in through some of the other topics that we've discussed. But we're going to be talking about percentages, what the word percent means, and how to go back and forth between percentages, decimals, and fractions, and then we'll look at a couple of relatively simple word problems where we can incorporate the use of percents. And again, all of this solving and things that we're doing are going to help us as we move forward into our next couple of modules. Okay, so what is a percent? Well, the word percent has a literal translation. So I don't know if you know this, but the word percent literally translates as out of 100. Out of 100. That is the literal translation for the word percent. So when you read something like, I don't know, 38%, that literally translates to 38 out of 100 or 38 over 100. So the word percent means out of 100. Okay, so every time you see that word or that symbol for percent or read the word percent, you should be thinking out of 100. Oh, if I got a 50% on a test, I got 50 out of 100. Okay, so since we can take our percent and literally translate it into a fraction, and fractions can be converted to decimals, we should be able to move from one format of the number to another. So we have to be able to convert from fractions to decimals to percents and any way in between. Okay, so how do we take a fraction and make it a decimal? A fraction can become a decimal by simply dividing. So when you have a fraction like 2 over 3, that fraction bar there is literally division. So 2 divided by 3. Take your numerator and divide it by your denominator. So we can just divide. And when I say we, I mean we can let the calculator do that. But you're going to divide your numerator by your denominator to go from a fraction to a decimal. And then if we want to go from a decimal to a percentage, you just multiply by 100. So you multiply by 100, and when you multiply by 100, basically all you're doing is moving your decimal to the right twice. So if that rule is okay for you, that's the shortcut, move the decimal twice, but that's what happens when you multiply by 100. So if you took 1 and divided it by 2, right? If you took 1 and divided it by 2, you'd get a decimal of 0.5. And if you multiplied by 100, moving the decimal twice, you would see that that's going to be 50%. Okay? So we can go from a fraction to a decimal by dividing. We can go from a decimal to a percent by multiplying by 100. So if we wanted to go from a fraction to a percent, we'd have to do both. To go from a fraction to a percent, you make the fraction a decimal and then multiply by 100. So fraction to percent would be both of the previous steps. Okay? Now to go from a decimal to a fraction, with a calculator is easy, but without a calculator, to go from a decimal to a fraction, what you want to do is you want to take your decimal amount and put it over the place value that your decimal is in. So you put it over the place value, and then you'll have a fraction that you could reduce. So for instance, if you had a decimal of, let's say, 0.15, that's the tenths place. The 5 is in the hundredths place. So if it's in the hundredths place, then you'd put your 15 over 100. Okay, or if you had, I don't know, 2.371. So this is the ones place, tenths place, hundredths place. This would be the thousandths place. So you would put your number 2371 without the decimal over 1,000 because it's in the thousandths place. Okay, so whatever your number is, you just get rid of the decimal, make it a fraction by putting that entire number without the decimal over the place value that the decimal goes out to. Okay? And then you can make your percentages fractions by simply putting them over 100. So remember, if you had 38%, that literally translates to 38 out of 100. So if you have a percent, you want to make it a fraction, you're just going to put your number, your percentage over 100, and then you're going to reduce. And then what's left? Well, if you want to go from a percentage to a decimal, it's the reverse of what we said earlier. If you go from a decimal to a percent, you multiply by 100. So to go from a percent to a decimal, you can divide by 100. And dividing by 100, instead of moving the decimal right twice, moves the decimal to the left twice. Okay, now you have calculators, and obviously I can't restrict your use of calculators, and I wouldn't anyway. So calculators can help with some of this. But again, these are skills that you should have, okay? So let's say we had a fraction of 3 over 25, and we wanted to be able to make that fraction a decimal and a percent. So we're going to take our 3, and we're going to divide it by 25, and it gives us a decimal, 0.12. So 0.12. And if we wanted the reduced fraction, we know we could hit that fraction button and it would show us, well, 3/25 is as reduced as it gets. Now, if I want to take that decimal and make it a percentage, which is our next column, as a percentage, we just multiply by 100. So I'm going to take this and multiply by 100, and what we get is 12%. So this is going to be 12%. Okay? Now in the next one, we have our decimal, and we want to go we're going to be able to take that decimal and make it a fraction, make it a percent. So I think the percent's probably going to be easier. Let's take this 0.761. If we just multiply it by 100, we're going to see when the decimal moves twice, it becomes 76.1%. So 76.1%. Now if I want to take that and make it a fraction. Now again, we have Desmos 0.761 here. If we just hit the fraction button, it will do it. But if you had a different type of calculator, or you wanted to know why, all you're doing is putting that 0.761 over the place value. So again, that's the tenths place, the hundredths, and then the thousandths place. That's why your 761 ends up over 1,000. And just to confirm that that doesn't reduce, right, we can see it, it's still 761 over 1,000. So as a fraction, this is 761 over 1,000. Okay, and then the last one we have is 104%. Let's make that a decimal first. If we take our 104%, if we move the decimal, which is right now after the 4, if we moved it left twice, that's the result of dividing by 100. So we have a decimal of 1.04. So this is 1.04. Again, as a decimal, and 1.04 over 100, right, because that 4 is in the hundreds place, that's our fraction, but we can see that our fraction reduces to 26 over 25. So as a fraction, it's 104 out of 100, but that is reducing to 26 over 25. 26/25. Okay, or you could also take this, right, and say 104% is 104 out of 100. Okay, so hopefully not too bad. We should be able to go back and forth from one format to another. And now let's apply the use of these percentages to a couple of different situations, some word problems which are going to be more challenging than the first few that we look at, but we're going to look at some situations like these where you should be able to find something like, what is 60% of 80, or 162 is 18% of what number, or 135 is what percent of 160, those types of problems. Probably seen those before. And to do them, you're literally going to translate, okay? Translate the question into an equation to solve. So we've done some translating. This is going to be working that process again. Really going to be 2 key words for you to translate. The word is, which we saw before, translates into our equal sign. And the word of is going to translate into multiply. Okay, the word of translates into multiply. And then if we have an unknown value, that's where we assign a variable. And I like to use x, but you can use really whatever variable you want. And if we have any percentages occurring in our problem, the percent is a form that helps us kind of understand what we're looking at. But in terms of making mathematical calculations, we never really do anything with the percent other than use it for understanding. If we're given a percent in a problem, we will convert it to a decimal or a fraction to actually use it. Okay, so these are always going to be converted to decimals or fractions. I usually will just convert to the decimal, but it doesn't matter either one. They have the same meaning. Okay, so for example, this problem says, what is 60% of 80? So if we were to translate this, the what is our question, okay? The is our equal sign. The 60% can be written as 0.60 or 60 out of 100. Of is the word multiply, and then we have 80. Okay, that's a literal translation. So our unknown, let's call it x, equals 60% of 80, so 0.60 times 80, and that's going to give us our answer. Okay, x is going to equal, let's go ahead and put that in the calculator, 60% of 80, 0.60, or just 0.6 times 80, is 48. And so 48 is our missing number. So we made it an equation, but technically we made it an equation just for the purposes of figuring out the not 48%. 48 is our number. I don't know why I stuck the percent there. Okay, let's try that again. So this next one says 162. So there's nothing to translate there. That's literally just 162. Is our equal sign. Is our equal sign. Let me color code it. Guys. Let me color code this for you. Is our equal sign. 18% is going to be 0.18, or we could put that as 18 over 100. Of is the word multiply, so let's put some parentheses to see what we're going to multiply. And then what number? We don't know, so we're going to call it x. Okay, so 162 translates to 162 is our equal sign. 18%, 0.18, or 18 out of 100. Of tells us to multiply, and then what number? We don't know. We stick an x there. So if we're trying to solve 162 equals 0.18 times x, all we have to do is divide both sides by that 0.18 to get x by itself. So I'm going to divide both sides by 0.18. And that's going to reduce to 1x all by itself, equal to, let's see, 162 divided by 0.18 is 900. So 162 is 18% of 900. So 900 is our answer on this one. Okay, let's try again here. Let's see, 135, nothing to translate there, is our equal sign. And then it says what percent, we don't know, let's call it x, of tells us to multiply. And what are we multiplying by is 160. So let's put 160 in the parentheses. So if I want to figure out what x is, then I'm going to divide both sides by 160. Alright, so if I'm trying to solve 135 equals x times 160 is 160 times x, all I have to do is divide to get rid of that multiply. So let me divide both sides by 160, and that is 1x all by itself equal to 135 divided by 160 gives me a decimal of 0.84375, and if I multiply that by 100, it will give me my percent, which is 84.35%. So 375%. Okay, and here's another one. If you feel like you're pretty comfortable with this and you want to try it out, then go ahead and do that. Although I did put something a little bit weird in this one. So we have 2/9%. So 2/9%. That is a strange thing right there. Percent, remember, means out of 100. So 2/9. We can't move the decimal just to make that a percent, but out of 100, remember, means we want that to be divided by 100. So 2/9 of a percent is really 0.002 repeating. But just so that it's all accurate, I don't want to have to round that decimal and make my answer really inaccurate. I'm going to put this as 2/9 out of 100. Okay, so 2/9 out of 100, that's 2/9%, and then it says of, so I'm going to be multiplying, and it's of 2,700, so multiplying by 2,700, and then our equal sign is, and then what color would I use? How much? We don't know. Let's call that x there. So really, there's no solving in this one. X is all by itself. All I have to do is put this into the calculator. So we have 2/9 out of 100. I already typed that in, and that all has to be multiplied by 2,700. And so we end up with 6. So all that craziness to get an answer of 6. So 0.2% of 2,700. So a really, not even 1%, right? Less than a percent of 2,700. And that's why we end up with this small number of 6. Okay? So hopefully those aren't too terrible. Let's look at a few more problems here where we're going to put some words in. This one's a little harder because we're not going to necessarily be able to directly translate. We really have to figure out what the question is before we can translate. So let me show you. It says, a Yahoo question of the week asked, at what age do you consider someone old? Out of 3,496 people who responded, 1,017 said age 80 is old. It says what percent of respondents believe that age 80 is old. So 1,017 out of the 3,496 is what percent? That's the question. Okay, so 1,017 is what percent of the 3,496. Okay, hopefully that makes sense as the question. So we want 1,017 is our equal sign. What percent? We don't know. Let's call it x. Of 3,496 means multiply by 3,496. So all we're doing to solve is dividing. And if you saw that without making an equation, that's totally fine. It's just sometimes people have a harder time. Some people have a harder time than others, so don't feel too bad if you need to go through the translating. So x is going to equal, let's put in our 1,017 divided by 3,496. And so we have, I can't keep all of this decimal, so I'm going to use the approximate here. So this is about 0.29, let's say 1. And if I want to multiply that by 100, then I will get my percentage. So 29.1%. So this is about 29.1%. So about 29.1% of these people in this survey said that age 80 is old. Okay, so you're not old till you're 80 according to these people. All right, number 6. 84% of the schools in the United States have transitioned to online classes. If there are 1,200 schools in Arizona, how many of them have transitioned to online classes? So what is the real question here, right? There's 1,200 schools. It says 84% of the schools are online. So we have to figure out what is 84% of the 1,200 schools that are in Arizona, right? What is 84% of 1,200? That's the real question here. 84% of the 1,200 schools in Arizona. So what we don't know, that's our question, is our equal sign. 84% is 0.84 or 84 out of 100, and then of means multiply, so we're going to multiply by 1,200. And no solving here, that's literally just going into the calculator. So 0.84 multiplied by 1,200 is 1,008. So of the 1,200 schools in Arizona, 1,008 of them, based on this statistic, are online. So 1,008 schools. Okay, and then last one. Again, if you feel like this is something you can handle and you want to try it, then give it a shot. Otherwise, it says that Melissa wishes to buy a house for $287,000, and to obtain a mortgage, which is something we're going to talk about in our next module. It's a loan for a house. In order to get a loan for the house, she has to pay 20% of the selling price as a down payment. So she needs to make a 20% down payment. So we have to figure out, so to determine the amount of Melissa's down payment. So it's 20% of the selling price, which we know is $287,000. So the real question is, what is 20% of that selling price, which was $287,000? Okay, so just like the last one, what we don't know is our equal sign. 20% is 0.20. Of means multiply, so multiplying by 287,000, and nothing to
to solve there. This is just a calculation. So what is 20% of $287,000? It's 57,400. So in order for her to be approved for a loan, she's going to have to come up with $57,400 before that loan's going to be possible. And 20%, I don't know if you've purchased a home, but it's a pretty standard requirement for a down payment. It's for a first-time home buyer. Sometimes they'll cut you some slack on that, but you end up having to pay what we call PMIs, or property mortgage insurance, if you don't put 20% down on your mortgage. Anyways, this is a pretty standard concept. I don't know if $287,000 is a standard home price anymore. I haven't been in the market in a while. But yeah, it's a good chunk of change you're going to have to come up with if you want to qualify for a home loan and not have to pay extra insurance or taxes because you didn't put enough down. Anyway, we're going to talk about mortgages more in our next module. For now, I think you have enough to work on with your percentages. But as always, if you need some extra help, then just reach out. All right, guys, take care.